Yay! I'd like to welcome to the stage Mr. Dave Intner. He is an architect and energy manager at Southern California Edison and general education guru extraordinaire. He will be leading today's panel on advancing BEM certifications, overcoming barriers in California and nationwide.
Thank you so much, Elise. Appreciate it. So we've assembled a panel of amazing experts today to tackle and address one of the key issues in the industry, and that is not having enough letters after our names on our business cards. No, but seriously, certifications are an important method for providing consumer protection, for providing quality assurance, and establishing the basic skills and acknowledgement of those skills necessary for communicating across industry and standardizing what competency is within the profession. And so our panel is going to look at a variety of existing certifications that they've been working on for a number of years and how those have evolved, emerging certifications, and a novel approach to applying those certifications in a pilot form to broader compliance with the code through jurisdictions. So I'd like to welcome up our panelists to provide their presentations, and then we'll do a bit of discussion and Q&A. So Gina Rodda with Gabel Energy, and also the lead piano player for the Quebec All-Electric Light Orchestra. Dimitri Contoyannis from Model Efficiency, and Sally Blair with NORESCO. And Gina will be doing our first presentation. You're welcome to come up here, or if you want to do it from your chair. Yep.
I don't have it that memorized.
Okay, good.
A long, long time ago, we were struggling with this new code. It all is a big circle, guys. And the discussion was, how are we going to accomplish our goals with I kind of giggle because of how simplistic the code was when we were struggling with this. And this complex code. How are we going to make sure that we have people who understand it, can apply it, and can enforce it? So this is a discussion that's not new. This was at the very beginning of all of this. And I don't know what button to press. That one, okay. So I want to tell you a little bit of the history of the Certified Energy Analyst Program that's hosted through CalBEM, California Association of Building Energy Consultants. It started with the CEPE. Do I have any CEPEs in the room? Yeah. So the Certified Energy Plans Examiner was a very simplistic test. It started in 1985. Oh, and the players in the room, do we want to guess who the players were in the room? It was started with Mike Gabel, Martin Zodd, some of the people that are part of the basis of what we do. So that's when they went, let's really look at what can we do to make sure they understand, one, that there's an energy code. It's amazing to me how people still don't know that there's an energy code. But it was so new. And we were really breaking ice of the icebergs because, that was kind of not a great picture to give. But no one was doing this. No one was even thinking of energy codes when California decided to go there. And the fact that we also had to think about how are we going to get people to be able to support this. So it evolved. And this was in support with the Energy Commission. The Energy Commission put the seed money into getting this to work and getting it developed. And who here remembers Doug Beeman? Doug Beeman is my mentor, man. He's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. And he's the one who took over really supporting and developing the Certified Energy Plans Examiner program. This was about this time that I was working away at Mike's office, and they were struggling with who can teach the non-residential code. We don't know anyone who can teach the non-residential energy code for the CEPE program. And I'm sitting right behind Mike going, me, me. And they got off the call, and he's like, Gina, there's a reason I ignored you. I'm like, why? He goes, you don't always say what you should say out loud. So in 2010, the CEPE got retired because it just wasn't, it was a multiple choice question as test. It got people to understand some of the basics, but not where our code was going in terms of complexity. So we needed to really look at something that robustly verified that the person that is passing this exam knows many different things. And not just where do you find it in the code, but can you understand it? Can you apply it? Do you know how to model it? And I don't know if you guys know, but we have a dream. And we have a dream that people who are doing this work are certified. And this was here back in 2010. We were having this conversation years ago. So to get it something that can be codified, it has to be incredibly robust. So we have developed towards 5 core competencies. This was developed with instructional designers and people who really know their stuff. I was in a lot of those meetings going, oh, I don't even know what you're talking about. And we had to put together, it's a 2-part exam, where the first part is multiple choice. And let me tell you, it's not easy. Who here is a CEA? Please raise your hand. I know there's a few of you. If you were to be super excited to tell me you passed it this last year, and that was super exciting. And the multiple choice questions, those who are CEAs, was it easy? No. It's the 5 core competencies that are really a major part of it. And then there's a complete separate exam that's about modeling. Can you at least show some basic competencies with modeling and modeling to the energy code? As we know as practitioners here, there's all sorts of modeling. This is specifically for energy code modeling. So if we pass just the multiple choice part of the exam, we're an AEA, Associated Energy Analyst. And that is in part being tapped into for this program that Sally is going to be talking about, because our enforcement agencies, they don't need to know how to model, but they need to understand the breadth and complexity of the energy code and the many different ways we can show compliance. So you do have to be, for an AEA, you have to be a CalBEM member in good standing, meaning you can't be a jerk. I can't believe it, I'm still a CEA, that's all I'm saying. You have to pass the multiple choice exam, and then you're going to have, every code cycle, you'll have to retake the test because codes change. What then is part of the CEA competencies that is part of that AEA is competency 1, basic concepts. If I'm a music major, I know you guys have all heard that. I fail this part of the exam every single time. This is my weakness, but man, do I have it about project assessment. I don't think I've ever not gotten 100% on project assessment. And then project takeoffs. Do we know what we're supposed to be getting? Do you know if you didn't get it? Have you guys noticed that, especially like with lighting, we don't have lighting wattages on cut sheets anymore. It's all about lumen output. So sometimes the work we have to do to get the data we need to show compliance to the energy code is more challenging than you might think. Then we have modeling and troubleshooting. I usually tell people in my mentoring program, I know a few of my mentees are in the room, I want you to be able to predict your compliance score within a couple of points before you even hit calculate. And the reason you can do that is because you're understanding what's going on under the hood, and you immediately know where to be doing troubleshooting. If you're seeing your cooling numbers going way off, you're like, what the heck is going on? I think I'll look at the insulation of my roof. You have to know what's tying to your different energy uses in terms of troubleshooting. And then consulting, taking it above and beyond. So a lot of, I don't like to call them energy consultants, I like to call them paper pushers. They're the 24-hour turnaround at $190, well, it used to be $99, now they're charging $199, and you have your compliance report to go into the building department, and I will never talk to you again. That's not energy consulting. Energy consulting is, let's talk about your ideals, let's talk about what you want to do, let's talk about the technology and how are we going to get you there. Oh, and as a side benefit, I'm going to help document this to the energy code. So, training. Energy Code ACE made a big commitment, the Codes and Standards program here in California, saying we're going to support your Certified Energy Analyst program. And they have developed classes around those 5 core competencies for single-family, non-residential, and multifamily. So we tap into everything that Energy Code ACE provides and beyond. There's a lot of other great training out there. I mean, every year I hear you guys, and I write things down, and guess what? That gets incorporated into my next year mentoring program of new things that I've heard about that new people should be hearing and learning about. So if you haven't been at Energy Code ACE website, I'm not even going to ask how many of you have never been here, because I really just don't want to know. But there's tools, like I talked yesterday about Q&As, where there's questions and answers that have been answered by the Energy Commission. We have that whole history there. And you can look it up by keywords. We have Reference ACE, which is the energy code language, the manuals, the appendices, the ACMs, all of it in one searchable database. Training, pretty much all our training is online these days. We are starting to delve into more online self-studies. And then our resources. We are in the process right now of updating all our fact sheets for 2025. We'll be coming out with the what's new and what's changed in the next few months. That has been why I haven't slept. So next steps, we need people to understand the value of certified energy consultants. Not everyone does. There's a lot of people out there that they want the cheapest and the fastest, and please don't tell me my design isn't beautiful the way it is. They don't want to have that interaction. We need to change that. We need to get people to understand the value. And in part of what was done to help support is the CEA program working or not working. Ryan Selby went into numerous different building departments throughout California and looked at jobs. And he looked at what does the CF1R say, this was a single family study, and then what do we actually see in the drawings? And do they speak to each other? And there was a lot of that came out of it. One, yes, CEAs were doing work better than non-CEAs. But two, us really seeing where the roadblocks were. And what do we need to do to the design professional industry to get them to understand you can't just say, see Title 24 for insulation. You just can't say dual paned window. We have to be specific, and that has to be part of what we are training the industry to understand as we show compliance to this. So we're taking what was taken out of the study, and we're using it to figure out at Energy Code ACE and CABEC, what can we do to educate and bring things further along. So I'm hoping that you guys will consider not one, just you being CEAs, but supporting the CEA program. It is voluntary. There are some cities that do give you extra credit for being a CEA. They might say your source margin score has to be 1, but if you have a CEA, it only has to be 0. So there are some benefits that we are seeing, but we need more of it. And if you're interested in this at all, and especially being in my mentoring program, because I really, really, really need you guys, let me know.
Thanks so much, Gina. I especially appreciate the dialogue on, really communicating the value of the energy consultants. It's been a big topic we've been talking about in working group 2, both days here. So the work being done in this certification program certainly helps to address some of those issues and questions. So that's a look at the California perspective, and now Dimitri's going to talk kind of more bigger nationwide and some of the work that ASHRAE and IBIPS are doing.
Oh, oops, sorry.
Pretty cool. All right, thank you. So I don't have a great song reference. This work was not started a long, long time ago, so maybe Yesterday by the Beatles. I won't sing it, though. So it's really encouraging to see all the great progress that's being made in California. In the national level, there hasn't been a ton of focus on certification in BEM until recently. This is a fairly new initiative led by IBIPSA USA. We formed a certification committee a couple years ago with an eye towards helping to crack this nut in the national level. You can see some of my working group leads here in the committee are listed. They did a lot of the heavy lifting about what I'm about to present. So I'll take all the credit, even though I did just some of the work. Okay, so the IBIPS USA Certification Committee is focused on improving quality control of building performance analysis for national code compliance and beyond code programs. That scope is very much focused on code models and beyond code programs. It's not a general modeling certification. It's very much focused on models that are being submitted and reviewed for a specific purpose. The reason that we're talking about it here today at CalBEM is because there is this desire to share the concepts that we've been working on and foster some collaboration. And I'll put on my glasses so that I look a little smarter while I'm talking. The status quo nationwide, there's really not a whole lot going on in terms of certification. There is an ASHRAE program, a modeling certification program, which is more of a generalist certification. It is not focused on code compliance specifically. We decided to form this committee to try to come up with a consistent framework to address some of the challenges, specifically that modelers need to know a whole lot of different rules for different locations in which they're working. Software developers need to create tools that can comply with many similar but not identical requirements depending on where a project is located. And then the QA and review process, much like here, lacks sufficient rigor. So the scope of our committee has been to attempt to develop frameworks for certifying software tools, coming up with a certification program for both modelers and model reviewers. The long-term goal is for an organization to implement these certification processes and partner with AHJs. That organization may be IBIPS USA, but it's still early on in the process, so nothing is predetermined. So we have, as I mentioned, we formed this committee a couple years ago, and we started by working on a review of past and present certification initiatives, which included CEA, by the way, and sort of published a report that tried to identify best practices, lessons learned from these past initiatives. We then moved on to trying to develop frameworks for certifying software tools, modelers, and model reviewers. And those are now published and available. And I'll share a link to a place where you can provide comment on those documents if you're interested. I would like to thank the US DOE for sponsoring these initiatives. Without their generous support, we would probably be way behind in our progress. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of how the different certification programs work for the 3 different areas, starting with modelers. First off, I'll just point out that nationwide, pretty much anyone can run an energy model. Doesn't matter if it's your first time doing a model, you're still able to produce the model for certification, whether you know what you're doing or not. Hopefully you do, but there's no guarantee that you do. There are no provisions that say that you must have any qualification whatsoever. So the IBIPSA program has come up with a point system in order to achieve a certification as a modeler. And you can see on this table here, there's a bunch of different ways to achieve the mandatory 10 points. You can get some points from being a PE, you can get points for being a registered architect. If you have the BEM certification from ASHRAE, that'll achieve you a fairly good number of points. But there is a heavy emphasis on project experience. That's really what gets you the most credit towards demonstrating your qualifications. Have you done this before? Ideally, you've done a lot of these projects, in which case it's very easy to become certified. And when I talk about project experience, to clarify, it's very specific experience. If you do an early stage model, that does not give you any points. You need to do code compliance models or beyond code models. You really need to demonstrate that you can do these very specific purpose-built models. All right, moving on to the software certification. The goal here is to produce a list of software tools that satisfies a set of requirements. Essentially, does the tool have the capabilities to do ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G or ECB modeling? Things that we've done thus far, we've also been interested in identifying tools that have produced all of the ASHRAE 140 output reports. You can see here on the bottom of the screen, we've developed a web portal where software vendors can submit ASHRAE 140 results for the latest and greatest version of ASHRAE 140, which does have pass-fail criteria. And it'll sort of parse through your submission and identify whether you've passed and which categories you passed, And the idea is that there could be a public list of tools that have gone through this testing process, and their results are publicly available. So we've actually developed this 140 portal already. Our goal this year is to release a similar tool which identifies tools that meet the ASHRAE 90.1 requirements as well. It's currently under development, so I don't have a nice screenshot for you yet, but next year at CalBEM, I'll have a great screenshot for you. ASHRAE 90.1, when I say it meets the requirements, we are not doing a rigorous rule set testing like is done here in California, because ASHRAE 90.1, the standard, does not have a requirement that tools must automatically generate a baseline. So really, we're asking you, do you meet the minimum requirements as specified in ASHRAE 90.1? And really, it's a list of capabilities that the tool has. Not particularly difficult to demonstrate those requirements are met, but it is important to know that a tool can do it. So the idea is that software vendors could essentially self-certify that they can check all these boxes as outlined in 90.1, and that there could be a list of tools that meet, not just 90.1 in general, but specific versions of 90.1, because these do change. There are subtle changes with every update to the code, or standard, I should say. Okay, the last area is the QA/QC provider and submission reviewers, the folks who actually review the compliance forms. Did this model demonstrate compliance or not? That's the trickiest part. The folks who review these models don't necessarily have a lot of time. They don't necessarily have all the expertise. Are they folks who've been modeling for 20 years? Probably not. So it's important that a process is put in place where somebody who is qualified can review these models. And it's great to hear that projects like this are happening in California. One organization that's done a very good job in making sure that qualified individuals are reviewing models is ResNet. So we have modeled this process after the ResNet model. And essentially, the way it works is there's a sort of overarching certifying body, which you see on the left of the graphic there. And then they will work with QA/QC providers. These are sort of organizations that hire reviewers, and they oversee the reviewers. And it's really up to them to make sure that they are bringing on reviewers who have the expertise. So it's a sort of decentralized review process. So the certifying body will ask a QA/QC provider to submit some documentation on what their review process is going to look like, what the qualifications of their reviewers should be, and then they'll go on and bring on specific individuals, the submittal reviewers, and the reviewers have to demonstrate that they're qualified following a similar point process like the modelers do. Slightly different requirements because these reviewers aren't necessarily turning out the models, but they do need to demonstrate that they understand the requirements of the code and they are qualified enough to understand what they're receiving from the energy modelers. So those are the certification requirements, or frameworks, I should say. They're not requirements anywhere yet. This is still all new, under development and fine-tuning, and we are in the process of reviewing comments that have been submitted. We've gotten some great feedback so far, but I welcome you to submit your comments as well. Technically, the public review period is closed, but these surveys are still open, so we'll welcome any comments that you submit. Thank you.
Thanks for that overview, Dimitri. It's exciting work, and excited to see where it all goes next. So in the awards section earlier, Elise said, hey, if you want to learn more about this really cool thing with jurisdictions and certifications, go talk to Sally and she'll tell you about it later. You don't have to go talk to her because she's coming right up right now to tell you all about it. So.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. All right, so I'm going to talk about increasing demand for the credentialing, and we don't have it all figured out yet, so I'll start with that. But we have projects, hopefully, to figure it out. So we all in this room really value energy code compliance and enforcement. This is where we're spending our time and energy. We're dedicating our careers to this cause. But there are a lot of market actors that are involved in the compliance process. where the energy code is a very small fraction of what they do, right? So architects, engineers, plans examiners, they're not spending all their time on energy code compliance and really valuing it necessarily in the same way we are. But in order to drive demand for these credentials, we're going to need to reach out to more roles and market actors and not just rely on energy consultants. This quote is from Karina Mills, who is the newly minted AIA California president. I think that just happened like this week, last week. But she was the keynote speaker at CalBEM, so the Building Energy Consultants Association, in September. And her quote was, "We quit." And her slide had a guy going like this, which I wanted to use, but my legal team said I couldn't use it because I couldn't cite it. But the point was, architects quit the energy code years ago. And in my experience, other roles, engineers, plans examiners, also quit the energy code years ago. And they're not quitting because they don't care and they don't think it's important. They're quitting because it's really complex and they don't have the expertise to do their task that we are all expecting them to do. And so what we're trying to figure out is why? Why don't they have the resources to get that expertise, or do they not value the expertise? What are the roadblocks really with getting all these other roles credentialed and to value the credential and then pursue it? So we are working on a pilot project, and that's actually my next slide. I probably should have switched these two. But in our work, both at Energy Code ACE over the years and in this pilot project, these are some of the roadblocks that we're starting to identify and understand. Again, we don't have the answers to these yet. We're trying to figure these out. But I think we as a community need to understand what these roadblocks are so that we can all put our heads together and figure out how to solve these things so that we can be successful with increasing energy code expertise and credentialing folks. So Santa Monica actually passed a REACH code a couple code cycles ago that required documentation authors to be a CEA. And ASHRAE and AIA came out and opposed it. And Santa Monica actually rescinded their REACH code accordingly. And the architects and the engineers said you shouldn't have to have a credential to be able to demonstrate compliance with the energy code. So there is some pushback from other licensed professionals who feel like their license should be enough to demonstrate compliance. So there's some work there we need to do about showing the value of this credential and really having energy code expertise. I think both of you guys were talking about plans examiners being CEAs, and I was cringing because I'm like, plans examiners are never going to be a CEA. You know, you were saying it's unlikely that a plans examiner is going to have 20 years of modeling. I would say it's not happening. So we have to be really realistic about what we're expecting plans examiners to do. In our pilot, we're trying to train plans examiners to be AEAs, and then to support them with CEAs as like on-call code coaches. It's really not realistic, in my opinion, to expect HJs to hire modeling experts to be plans examiners. I think that's a pretty challenging expectation. So we need to figure out how do we get the plans examiners to have expertise in the energy code and then support them with that additional modeling expertise, because it is important that they're able to accurately plan check performance path projects and systems. We have been talking to HJs about this concept, kind of like what ResNet's doing about using third-party credentialed experts as plans examiners. I think that it will catch on with some jurisdictions, but so far we've been hearing that HJs are really hesitant to add any cost to the permit applicant. And so what we've been talking about with them is the permit applicant hiring that third-party plan check and doing the plan check before it's submitted to the HJ, and we've gotten a lot of concern, I think, from the HJs about that model because it adds cost to the permit applicant. You know, the thing that, the biggest roadblock, I think, at HJs is time, right? Spending time to plan check for energy code compliance. And when HJs use a third-party company, they're typically paying hourly for those plan checks. So they're concerned that if they ask their third-party provider to beef up the energy code, the time they spend on the energy code, they're going to get bigger bills from that third-party provider. So they're worried about time and costs. So that's something we need to think about and figure out. We've heard from a lot of HJs that they can't even find and hire plans examiners. They have open positions, and they can't get people to apply to become plans examiners. So if we require or encourage that plans examiners also be a CEA or an AEA credential, it's just another credential that the applicants, the job applicants need to have. So that's a concern, a pretty big concern of HJs. And then something we've heard as well is both the AEA and CEA credential cover all building systems, right? So if you are an installer or a designer and you only have expertise in lighting, it might be difficult for you to study and understand the energy code for all of the building systems and be able to pass the exam for that. And if you do, are you really garnering a lot of value out of all that knowledge on the other systems that you're really never going to work on or apply? So there's some resistance there from like ATTs or designers who are experts in just one system type. So these are the roadblocks that we've identified in our work. We're working on a pilot. PG&E is funding this to figure out the solutions to some of these roadblocks. And the pilot is working with HJs in PG&E territory, and we're talking to them about a few models. One is passing local ordinances that would require or incentivize the documentation author to be credentialed. So this would be the modeler or the person filling out the compliance forms for mandatory and prescriptive. The other model is working with plans examiners at the HJ to go through the CalBEM mentoring program and become AEAs and pass and become credentialed themselves. And then the third model we're investigating is the HJ allowing third-party plan check and requiring that that third-party plan check be conducted by a credentialed expert. Based on the market assessment work that we did in Working Group 1 last year, that work fed into the design of this PG&E pilot. And as we were designing the pilot this spring, I worked with Daniel Wong from the Energy Commission to submit a grant application to DOE, and we were awarded $4 million from DOE. CEC was awarded $4 million from DOE, basically to scale the pilot results. So we're doing the pilot now, and it will be going through 2025. And we're trying to understand what models are going to work with HJs, and then we'll be using the DOE money to recruit a lot more HJs, hopefully get a lot more AEA and CEAs credentialed. CalBEM is going to design and put in place a quality assurance program for the AEA and CEA credentials. So really exciting that hopefully this time next year, even in 2 years, this grant's 3 years long, so probably 2025 through 2027, we'll be able to give more updates on the progress we're seeing accordingly.
All right, great stuff. So we're going to go ahead and just do a few questions here and then open it up to any questions that you all out there have as well. So just to kind of start with and guys touched on this in your talks a little bit, but maybe we can elaborate some, and particularly in kind of the more emergent programs where they're still kind of developing what they're going to be. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges or barriers in developing and adopting a certification framework?
I'll start. Yeah, Sally touched on it. If you're a modeler and you don't want to go after a certification, well, nobody's forcing you to do it, right? So there is this resistance where people, if you don't need something, you've got a day job, you're busy. It's hard to dedicate the time and sort of brain power towards achieving that unless somebody says you must do it. That's not to say that nobody does it, but it certainly limits the adoption.
I was one of those. I didn't want to be a CEA. I didn't want to be a lead AP either. I wanted to be a piano player, but that's a whole nother story at another time. And it was Mike Gabel who said, "You're going to be a CEA. This is what I believe in. This has value. And you might, in your little head, think you know everything, but we need other people to know what your experience brings to the table." And I have to say, at this point in my company, everyone has to be a CEA plus something else. They can be lead AP, they can be Green Point rated. Jose, when he worked in my office, he took on all of the solar assessment. He became the solar assessment expert. So everyone has to do a couple of things. But what I find the hardest thing in maintaining a certification program, Travis, are you still in the room? Writing the questions and giving appropriate answers that are not tricky, that are meeting the Bloom level of the competency we're trying to achieve. And then guess what? As soon as you think you're done, what happens next? There's another code cycle, and you got to do it all over again. It's a never-ending process. To me, that's one of the hardest things it is for KBEC to maintain.
As far as value, I think the value proposition has to be really big. The commitment to get an AEA or a CEA, I mean, we're putting a cohort together in this pilot, and we're asking the plans examiners for 10 hours a month for a year to study and then to take the exam next year. That is not a small ask, and these plans examiners have to go to their boss and ask for that approval, right? And their biggest issue is resource constraint. So it's not a small task to become an expert in the energy code, and when the energy code's only a small piece of your work, that doesn't necessarily align. So we've got to figure out a value proposition where it's really going to be worth it for somebody to spend 10 hours a month studying for an exam, essentially.
One of the things I'm hoping to, this is one of my outcomes I'm trying to get with the pilot program. We were talking to one of our AHJs, and they were telling us how many hours they spend doing a plan check for energy. And I went, "Oh, you're taking way too much time." And I think it's in part because they have to keep looking things up. They don't feel comfortable in the code. One, the restructure is going to help, I feel. But two, once they get more comfortable with how it all works, it's going to be less time for them to be more knowledgeable.
So a question that I think builds on a slide that you had, Gina, around just not just the mechanics of what you need to know and what you get tested on for the work that a certified professional might do, but kind of the broader knowledge base that you need to have to be able to really carry out this work in a meaningful way. So where's that balance, and how challenging is it to quantify and test things like building science, interpreting plans, providing design recommendations, the things that maybe aren't as easy to quantify as did I get the right answer, and how critical is it for these credentialing programs to be able to address those dimensions?
So writing test questions is really hard, and appropriate answers that are not tricky. It's really hard. It's really, really, really hard. And also the balance of how many questions are Bloom level 1 versus Bloom level 5. There's a careful balance. And there's also, what are we trying to capture with a multiple choice question? It's a pretty simplistic testing protocol, right? But we're asking about complex things. So it is very, very, very challenging, and that has to be considered every single time we rewrite questions. There is so much work that goes into what do we want to test, how are we going to test it, and what are we hoping to get in terms of a correct response versus a wrong response.
I'll add to that too. So, all those items you listed are part of the job description, although there's not a job description as an energy modeler. That's a big problem. But you do need to understand building science. You need to understand how a drawing set goes together and how to translate that into the model. You need to understand how to use the tool itself. You need to understand how to interpret the results, QA, debug the results. There's a lot going on there. So, if you want to be a really impactful modeler, there's a lot to learn. At this point, I'll put in a plug for another DOE-supported project, BEM Cyclopedia, which is an educational tool that covers a lot of those aspects. Certainly, not everything, but the intent is to address this gap of knowledge. A lot of folks come into this industry as architects, as engineers, but have never learned a thing about building energy modeling. I'm a mechanical engineer. My college education, we learned nothing about buildings whatsoever. All learned on the job. All of my energy modeling experience learned through projects and banging my head against the wall. So, there are starting to become better resources available to learn these things and also to look them up as you need them to address a specific challenge that you're facing. But there's a ways to go. But, to address the original question, you need to know all that stuff, and it's up to you to figure out how to do it. So, check out these resources like that, Energy Code ACE. They're great, and they just need to be utilized.
I'm just going to do a plug for ISVE. They have an amazing modeling guide that they give out for free on their website. It's integrated into my mentoring program. There's some great stuff out there.
All right. So I think I'll ask one more question, and then we'll see what everyone else has that they'd like to ask. So, certifications are kind of a snapshot in time of competency. And of course, the industry is moving fast, codes are moving fast. How do you guys address or plan to address what happens after certification? So how credentials are maintained, continuing education, recertification, those sorts of things.
On the national level, we have not addressed it yet. It's an open question to be dealt with in the future. But I'd love to hear how Gina and the folks at CalBEM are dealing with it so we can learn from their experience.
So similar to at the state, at what you guys are doing, you do have to show experience with a minimum amount of projects that has been reviewed by a CEA. So we're making sure someone who understands the program and the expertise we're looking for is reviewing it. Then that's when you get to become the official CEA. After you also take a little thing about ethics. Each code cycle, people have to recertify. So the very first time you take a CEA exam, you get, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's 60 questions. Plus you have to take the half-day modeling exam. Subsequently, you do a recertification and it's half the amount of questions, and there's no redo of the modeling. Once you've passed the modeling, you've passed the modeling. But then there's continuing education units that must be maintained every single year. And an event like this would be acceptable as a CEU that you're putting towards maintaining your certified energy analyst certification.
I'll just add something that's sort of related, but not exactly. But part of the DOE work is for CalBEM to figure out that quality assurance program, which does not exist right now with the CEA and the AEA. So I think that's a really awesome use of money, and I'm really excited to see what they come up with. But the idea is, Gina was telling me last night over drinks that somebody called her up and said, we need a CEA to sign this. Here it is. I emailed it to you. Please sign it. And
They sent me all their CF1Rs. That's all they gave me and said, just sign them. We just need your signature.
okay, we don't have wine right now, so maybe later. It was better over wine.
I'm sorry, there was a lot of wine in
But-
that sentence.
But the point is, the quality assurance program would hopefully weed out things like that right now, like what we're seeing with the documentation that's, not done by somebody who's an expert or knows what they're doing.
Great. All right. So what questions does everyone have for the panel? Got one back there.
Michael Solver from A2 Efficiency. More one for the future, I guess, assuming this all goes well. We keep credentials and everything. Will credentialing become even more important as we move into the world of modeling for building performance standards, predictions, like the predictive modeling aspect of it, and the education has to go up to like another level of a whole different purpose for this, right?
I wouldn't say more important. I think it's really important right now.
I'll add to it. I don't know if this microphone's working. Is it? Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great point, and we talked about this in Working Group 1 yesterday. Code compliance modeling and predictive modeling are not one and the same. How's that? That's better. Yeah. There's a lot more attention to detail. There's a lot less reliance on defaults and prescribed values if you're doing a predictive model. There's a lot more interaction with other human beings and asking them about how the building will be operated. It's going to be a game changer, and we need to be ready for it, which is not to take away from the importance of code compliance modeling today, but the software tools, and I'll talk about California because there is actually a compliance tool that gets rigorously reviewed. It's not built to do predictive modeling, right? And oftentimes it's the only model that's done for a project in California. So the tools need to evolve, the modeling processes need to evolve, and the level of detail of the review absolutely need to evolve, because at the end of the day, if your model is no good, that's money, out of the owner's pocket. And if you're the one who did the model, they might come after you.
Okay. All right. Over here, Nick.
Yeah, hi. I can imagine the benefit of more proficient modelers, more proficient reviewers, and in theory, like the benefit is that code compliant results, maybe sometimes there's savings left off the table, right? And like by more proficient reviewers and modelers, we recoup those savings that we didn't actually achieve. Has there been any studies to kind of quantify what that could be in terms of, emissions and dollars?
Yeah, Brian Selby did a CEA assessment. I think Gina touched on it in one of her slides. I don't remember all the numbers, but he partnered with HJs and went and looked at residential plan sets. And I think what he was looking at was, is the Title 24 documentation accurate, but then also is that information on the plans and something that plans examiners can even verify on the plans. So he looked at projects that were documented by CEAs and projects that were not documented by CEAs. And I think he found like on average, 24% more accurate when the I think it was on average 24% more accurate when a CEA was used to document compliance. And then he had a whole bunch of numbers that were by measure, and I see some of the measures were up to 42% more accurate when a CEA was used.
I'll follow up. Is there any way that they've scaled that type of delta, like sort of statewide, and as a way to kind of justify the increased effort?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that being done.
All right. Mr. Will?
You all know I don't need a mic, but I'll wait for it.
It's part of the video.
Thanks, Carrie. Something I've been struggling with in my own mind, and I've asked this tough question to Nick, apologies for that, so I'll ask it to you all here for our own public safety. Do you all believe that the role of the energy modeler, with or without a certification, needs to absorb more liability or have less liability for the industry to be more important?
It shocks me when I hear of people who do this work who don't understand their liability. We are bringing to the table alternative solutions. We're saying, yeah, that's not enough, or this is where we can get flexibility. I am helping design the building. I have liability. And I think it's inherently, that's one of the reasons a lot of people don't adopt new technology, is because of the fear of liability. The construction industry is very much all about limiting liability. And you can't expect to be in the construction industry and not inherently have liability. So I had a project years ago. It was not when I worked at Gabel, it was when I was at the engineering firm. And we got brought in through a lawsuit. And what happens with construction lawsuits, anyone who even breathed on a drawing gets drawn into the lawsuit. And you have to prove you did your due diligence, that you did exactly what you were, your certification, and technology, and what you promised the client. And we had to spend, and this is like 25 years ago, we spent $10,000 in lawyer fees just for the lawyer to go, why are you even here? Go away. You totally are not part of this lawsuit. We have to be conscious, always, that that's a possibility with the work we do.
To expand on that and address your question, the more liability that's on your shoulders, the more attention you're going to pay to the work you're doing. The first time, if you're a PE, that first time you stamp the drawings, there's a bead of sweat rolling down your forehead. Yeah. So, more liability is a scary thing, but it also forces you to really pay careful attention to the work you're doing.
I think with predictive modeling and BPS, that modelers are going to have to take on more liability. And years ago, we were all talking about outcome-based codes, right? Like, I haven't heard that in a long time. But one of the big roadblocks to outcome-based codes was modeler liability, and the way that contracts are structured right now on design teams and with the owners, and what the contract language is, and what the professions codes are. And that was a big discussion when we were talking about outcome-based. And it feels like BPS is pretty similar to outcome-based codes in a lot of ways. So I think you're talking about the modeling changing, which I agree with, but in order for predictive modeling to take off, the contract language is going to have to change.
It also raises the question of whether the design trades are going to want to take more responsibility for doing the models themselves. If they are the ones who are ultimately responsible for the design, which is currently the case. The modeler is not responsible for the design. They produce the forms, right? I'm obviously not trying to minimize our impact on the project, but if there are financial penalties involved, will the mechanical engineer want to say that this is my design, I'm going to make sure that I model it exactly the way I've designed it, and take away work from a purpose, individual modeler? It's interesting to think about how the industry may change, but I think it will change pretty significantly.
More questions, anyone?
I've got more.
Okay.
Oh, here you go, Greg.
Thanks, Will. I guess more of a comment on this topic than a question, but I just support, ensuring qualified people are doing energy modeling and running models, but just want to remind everybody also that, you kind of touched on it, but, the modeler, I'd like to think I'm a part of the design, but really a compliance model isn't part of the design. It's, following the design, it's measuring the design for code compliance purposes. And in my experience, when I work with architects in California versus outside of California, the outside of California drawings are better. Like exterior walls have layer by layer details and descriptions and R values. In California, more often than not, that detail has the R value, like there used to be one there, I think, but it just says see Title 24 drawings. So I think we just need to keep that in mind that, and I think even, I should have brought this up, before right now, but I think a good proposal for Title 24 code would be, and this is something that 90.1 has and Title 24 doesn't, is just documentation requirements, like to put a little more focus on, or specification of what needs to be on the architectural drawings or what details should be there, and things like that. Because as the modeler, we're supposed to be representing what's on the drawings, but that's not always very good.
Chicken or the egg? Egg or the chicken? I have found I have two different types of clients. I have the clients that come to me the week before they submit for permit and go, give me my paperwork. And I just have one right now on my desk. And this is a large building with lots of glass, and they're at 75% CD, and they're bringing me in now. I'm going to walk away from the job because that's not the type of work we do. I am blessed to have many of my clients, they engage me at schematic design. My models are driving their design decisions, even though, yes, it's code, but it does drive their designs. We do have some, and be aware the documentation requirements of the energy code doesn't live in the energy code. It lives in Title 24, Part 1, the administrative code, Chapter 10. This is like the third time today I'm saying this. And there it says exactly what needs to be in the drawings. It says exactly there of anything that's being documented in your model has to be in that drawing set or in the specs. It has to. And that the building departments can ask for whatever they want to ask for to make sure what we're doing is fully supported in the design. I do love the idea of what are some good design practices. I have to say at Energy Code ACE, we have put together a library of details that are helping architects with what should those layers entail, and how do they tie to, let's say, the air barrier requirements of the energy code, and then also the thermal energy performance of that opaque surface. So there's lots of work we can do there, it really is, but I think we already have a good set of requirements already living in our building code that we can build on.
Okay. Sarah, you had a question?
Okay, thank you. Is there any synergy between different certification that we have, yours and CA, and also BMP, am I right? So that's one question I have, and how can we make it easier? Because in order to facilitate the process of having more knowledgeable people doing the energy model, we need to facilitate it, make it easier for people to get the certification, have something, like have some basic knowledge to do energy modeling. So that would be one question. And then for the CEA, I just wonder if I took the exam. It's not, as you said, it's not as easy as you would think. But my question is that, what's the reason of taking the exam again and again? Because if somebody has already a CEA, they have the basic information, they know how to read the code, they know how to do the model. It's just doing the one more project in order to figure out what's the new policy. So, for example, for LEED, we only have, you have to only take, I think, continue just some courses online, and that's enough. You don't need to take the exam again and again. So I just wonder, how can we, how can we think about this? Like, that actually is a barrier that a lot of people, they don't want to take the exam again and again, especially that the exams are usually in sites that are not in the major cities. So there's a cost. You have to leave your office. It's just a lot of cost associated with it.
Well, similar to what Dimitri was talking about, that if you have certifications and other organizations, those are going to give you something. So I said you had to have a certain amount of projects that are reviewed by a CEA, et cetera. You have less of that if you have one of those other certifications. So that is incorporated into that. The BEMP is, you know, as Dimitri was talking about, it's, do you know how to model? Which is different from the Certified Energy Analyst certification, which is, do you know how to support the energy code? And that's why it has to change every 3 years, because the energy code changes every 3 years. And if you think the code and your software is staying static, then you're going to be behind very quickly. We have to evolve as our information and resources evolve so that we can say this certified energy analyst knows this code versus last code. I just was looking at a project that was 2016, and I opened it up in my software and went, whoa, it looks so different. And there were so many less pieces I had to model. We've gone through so many intense changes on how we do our work that we have to be able to capture that.
Okay. We have two tasks in our DOE project. One is to investigate and maybe establish competency equivalency for the CEA. We recognize that the AEA and the CEA is California specific, and they're modelers from outside of California that do compliance work here. So we don't want to penalize people and make them get BEMP and then CEA and then IBIPSAs, and then, you know, they have to have 5 different certifications. We do hope and think that this DOE work can be a model for other states and other jurisdictions. So we want to be conscious that it's not just for California. So the idea there is to, CalBEM has already outlined all the competencies for the AEA and the CEA. And so to look at, you know, maybe work with ASHRAE and say, what are the competencies for BEMP? And do some of those overlap with what is required for the CEA? And if so, then maybe they show like AEA and BEMP, and they could take an abridged, you know, modeling exam. So we're conscious of that, and that's one of the tasks in the DOE project. Another task in the DOE project is to digitize the AEA, the multiple choice, which I guess it is already an online exam, but it's proctored. And so we're looking, CalBEM is going to look at how do we proctor it not in person, so you don't have to go in person to reduce the costs of maintaining that credential.
All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question if there's another one out there. Yep, got Will.
Thank you. Yeah, kind of a follow-up on my last question about liability and just thinking things. This is a group here that prides itself on taking action. So if it seems like the direction we need to go is emphasizing the importance of the energy modeler role in California, do you think it's a good idea, and how would we be added to the list of disciplines on drawings? Architects have their A, electrical engineers have their E's, so on and so forth. Do we need to be added to that list, and if so, how do we do that? Which steps do we take?
I want a gold star.
So, New York has the precedent for EN sheets, they call it. So EN sheets there has to have the drawings that have to have everything layered, written up clearly with the U-factor calculations tables in sheets themselves. So that's a separate set you have to follow. It's a lot of extra work. And when you look at California and you search for compliance reports, there are people who can generate compliance reports for $300. So you
$99, 24 hours turnaround.
Yeah, there you go. You know all those guys.
Well, we do now, all my projects, we have T-sheets. for Title 24. And that's what the majority of my clients do, unless, let's say, it's just an HVAC upgrade, of which then we usually don't even need drawings, and it's our paperwork that's being submitted along with the permit application. So it depends on project scope. There isn't anything standardized yet, but I do think there's already, the industry's going in the direction of T-sheets. And I think maybe we see what the industry does, and if they're not consistent, we consider that when we look at potentially this certification being at the state level.
I'm going to break protocol here, and as a panelist, I'm going to ask a question to the panel. And this is mainly for Sally, I think. You raised as one of the barriers, cost of third-party review. And I'm curious to what extent you will be quantifying that as part of your DOE project. How much does it typically cost, or how much will it typically cost to hire a third-party reviewer? How dependent is it on building type, project size? And what does that amount to if you were to extrapolate across all of the projects that go through certification in California? Because I think that would be really interesting to know what that monetary impact is. And how does that compare to compliance improvement initiatives? Is there some utility funding source that can help to offset that cost? These are the questions that I think can help to address how big a barrier is it really, and I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah, it's a great question. So with the DOE funding, there's a requirement for meeting the federal Justice 40 goals. So we committed to 40% of the funding going to disadvantaged communities, or HJ serving disadvantaged communities. One of the ways we're doing that is by paying for a third-party plan check, energy code plan check, for any project that is in a disadvantaged community. So I do think we'll be able to gather the data on how many hours and how much does it cost, and we can gather as much detail as we want on those projects. Hopefully we'll get some projects in disadvantaged communities, because that's the only way that funding would be provided. And that's not in our control. So we have to wait and see, but there is potential for us to gather that type of data.
Oh, okay, we'll allow one more question, Luke.
Okay. Yeah, maybe pointing towards the future, I think reflecting on a lot of this stuff, I think many of us have an idea of when we are submitting a project, what does a perfect project look like? Where everything's well documented, it's coherent, it's not just demonstrating compliance, but it's really easy for a third-party reviewer to verify that too. Whether or not it's alignment in the forms and the plan sheets, just perfect alignment there. Maybe it's also submittal of an input model. Maybe that's an easier way to do this, which is allowed for in the administrative code. But the piece I've been trying to work with on my local ICC committees is building departments help us help you come halfway there or 80% of the way there. Because we want to help, if you were viewing this well, then we look better. The good consultants are going to look better. They're going to be more integrated in the project team. Also, project teams know how to respect that role better, because there's all these boxes you need to check. There's a fluency and a workflow. Right now, we're in this gap between, we're here talking with each other, and Sally, you're engaging building departments, Gina, we're individually engaging the building departments, but hopefully we can work towards that. That these projects that you presented on are exactly that example that we need for how do we make all projects perfect.
Great.
I'll comment that, what does a perfect project look like? I imagine something like a unicorn. But, until we can develop those perfect projects, I think all the things we're talking about here are very necessary for our industry.
All right, and on the note of the perfect project, I think that's a perfect point to close our discussion. Thanks everyone for your attention today, and let's give it up for our awesome panel of energy modeling superstars.